The battle ended with fire and silence, and the slow drift of wreckage through the void. Two of the remnant warships had been destroyed, their hulls torn open and their crews scattered across the stars. The third had retreated, limping away with its engines barely functional and its captain, screaming about reinforcements that would never come. Kepler 7 still hung intact in the darkness, its 12,000 residents alive and safe because 3 people had chosen to fight when running would have been easier. Jiuk sat in the ruins of his shuttle, breathing through the pain of cracked ribs and a dozen smaller wounds, while emergency crews worked to extract him from the wreckage. He had pushed the little ship far beyond its limits, and it had given everything it had before finally dying around him. But it had been enough. It had been exactly enough. Minji was alive, unconscious but stable in the medical bay, where Vraska had delivered her escape pod with surprising gentleness. The data she carried had been transmitted to both Drakari High Command and every major news outlet in the Sovereignty, broadcast on frequencies that could not be blocked or silenced or denied. The remnants' conspiracy was exposed there. Shadow War was over before the real one could begin. 3 days later, Yayuk stood in a formal hall aboard a Drakari diplomatic vessel, wearing borrowed clothes because all of his possessions had burned up with his shuttle. Vraska stood before him in ceremonial armor, her scales polished until they gleamed like living jewels, and her wings spread wide in a display of authority and respect. Yun Yayuk of humanity, she intoned, and her voice carried through the hall with the weight of ancient tradition. You have shed blood in defense of a Drakari warrior. You have fought beside us against enemies who sought to destroy the peace between our peoples. You have shown honor beyond measure and courage beyond expectation. I was just trying to help, Yayuk said quietly. I am a mechanic. It is what I do. You are far more than a mechanic, Vraska replied, and something warm flickered in her amber eyes. By the authority granted to me by the Crimson Fleet and the Drakari High Council, I name you clan-worthy. A murmur ran through the assembled Drakari witnesses, and Yayuk saw shock on many of their scaled faces. He did not fully understand what the title meant, but he could tell from their reactions that it was significant. Clan-worthy is the highest honor we can bestow upon one who does not carry Drakari blood. Vraska explained. It means that any Drakari who meets you owes you hospitality and protection. It means that you are considered family in every way that matters. It means that your name will be remembered in our histories for as long as our species endures. Yayuk did not know what to say, so he simply bowed his head in acceptance. Later that evening, he sat with Minji in a quiet observation deck overlooking the stars. She had recovered enough to walk, though she still moved carefully and flinched at sudden sounds. The years of conditioning were not gone, and perhaps they never would be entirely. But she was fighting to reclaim herself one day at a time. I'm going to turn myself in, she said softly. I need to face justice for the things I did while I was under their control. You are not responsible for those actions. Maybe not entirely, Minji agreed. But I need to stand before a court and tell my story. I need to look at the families of people I hurt and say that I am sorry. It is the only way I will ever find peace. I will testify on your behalf. Yayuk said, I will tell them everything about the remnant and what they did to you. I will make sure they understand that you were a victim before you were a weapon. Minji reached out and took his hand, and for a long moment they sat in silence while the stars wheeled slowly past the window. I am sorry I could not find you sooner, she whispered. I looked for you after I escaped. I searched every station and colony in this sector, hoping you were still alive. I was hiding. Yayuk admitted, hiding from my grief and my guilt and the life I did not know how to live without you. What will you do now? Yayuk thought about his destroyed shuttle, and his empty workshop and the 8 years he had spent running from his past. I am going to finish what I started, he said finally. I'm going to build something new. 6 months later, A small repair shop opened on the Drakari border world of Thornbastid was the first human business in Drakari territory, and its owner was a quiet man with gentle hands and eyes that had seen too much sorrow, but still managed to find moments of joy. Yayuk had come a long way from the grief-stricken ghost who had hidden on Kepler 7, and he had learned that healing was not about forgetting the past, but about finding the courage to walk forward into the future. The day the shop opened, Vraska arrived with a gift. It was a tool set crafted from Drakari steel and passed down through warrior generations. Ancient and valuable and far too precious for a simple human mechanic. "What is this for?" Yayuk asked, turning the tools over in his hands with wonder. "You fixed my ship." Vraska said, "You fixed my understanding of your species. Perhaps now you can fix other things. The galaxy has many broken vessels." Yayuk, and not enough humans willing to mend them. She spread her wings and lifted into the air, and Yayuk watched her fly until she became a dark shape against the alien sky. And then he turned back to his shop, where a dozen customers were already waiting. There were Drakari warriors with damaged weapons and frightened merchants with failing engines and young mechanics who had heard stories about the human who had fought beside a dragon warrior and wanted to learn his secrets. Yayuk looked at them all. These aliens and strangers who had once seemed so different from himself. And he saw only people who needed help. He picked up his tools, the ones Vraska had given him and the ones he had carried for years, and he walked toward his workbench with a smile on his face. The universe was full of broken things. He thought ships and hearts and the bridges between species, who should have been friends all along, but that was okay, because Yayuk was a mechanic in mechanics. Fixed what was broken. He started with the first customer, a young Drakari whose personal craft had suffered damage during a training exercise, and he listened to her describe the problem with patience and care. She seemed nervous around him at first, uncertain how to speak with a creature so small and strange. But Yayuk put her at ease with quiet competence and gentle humor. By the time he finished the repair, she was laughing at one of his jokes and promising to recommend his shop to all of her clutchmates. Was how it started, one repair at a time, one conversation at a time, one small act of kindness building into something larger and more lasting than any battle he had ever fought. The war between humans and Drakari never came, and historians would later argue about why. Some said it was the exposure of the remnant conspiracy. Others pointed to new treaties and diplomatic channels that opened in the months following the incident at Kepler 7. But those who knew the truth understood that peace was not built by governments or treaties. It was built by ordinary people who chose to help each other when helping seemed impossible. It was built by a mechanic who saw a broken ship and decided to fix it even when fixing it might cost him everything, even when the universe seemed determined to make him fail. Yayuk worked until the foe. Yayuk worked until the Fargent determined to make him fall. Yayuk worked until the fall. Yayuk. Stars came out, and the shop finally grew quiet. Then he stood in the doorway and looked up at the unfamiliar constellations of this alien world, and he thought about Minji fighting for her freedom, and Vraska flying somewhere among those distant stars, and all the broken things still waiting to be mended. Tomorrow there would be more work, more challenges, and more opportunities to make a difference in a galaxy that desperately needed people willing to try. But for now, Yayuk simply stood and breathed and allowed himself to feel grateful for the life he had built from the ashes of the one he had lost. He was home, finally and truly home. 3 warships hung in the void outside the station, like predators waiting to strike. Yayuk could see them on the bay's external monitor, their hulls painted black and their weapons arrays already glowing with the promise of destruction. The remnant had sent their finest vessels armed with enough firepower to reduce Kepler-7 to scattered debris in a matter of minutes. "They are hailing the station," Minji said, her fingers dancing across the communication terminal. "They are demanding the surrender of all 3 fugitives within 10 minutes, or they will open fire. There are 12,000 people on this station," Yayuk said quietly. "Civilians, families, children who have never held a weapon or even seen a war. The remnant does not care about civilian casualties," Minji replied. "In their minds, anyone who consorts with alien species is already a traitor to humanity." Vraska's wings spread wide, and her scales seemed to shimmer with fury in the crimson light. "Then we fight? Fight?" Yayuk turned to face her. "You have 1 damaged ship. I have a shuttle that has never been tested in combat, and Minji has nothing but the uniform on her back. We cannot win battle against 3 warships. I do not intend to win." Vraska said, "I intend to make them bleed. Among my people, a warrior who dies taking enemies with her is honored for 10,000 years. What good is honor to the dead?" "Yeah," Yuk demanded. "The dead do not care about songs sung in their name, and the people on this station do not deserve to die for your glory." Vraska turned to him with fire in her amber eyes, ready to argue, but something in Yayuk's expression made her pause. He was not afraid. She had expected fear from this small, fragile human facing impossible odds. But instead, she saw something else entirely. She saw a man who was thinking, calculating, finding the edges of a problem that seemed to have no solution. "You have an idea," she said slowly. "I have the beginning of one," Yayuk admitted. "But it requires all 3 of us working together. And it requires you to trust me. I am a Drakari warrior." Vraska growled. "We do not trust easily. Then consider it a calculated risk." Yayuk turned to the VI base control panel and began pulling up schematics of the station and the surrounding space. "The remnant expects you to run or surrender. They do not expect us to attack, because attacking would be insane. Is that not what we are doing?" Minji asked. "Yes, but not in the way they expect." Yayuk pointed at the display where the 3 warships were holding position in a loose formation. "They have positioned themselves to cover the main escape routes, but they are ignoring the debris field to the station's north, because the debris field is full of old mining equipment and navigation hazards," Minji said. "Any ship that flies through there would be torn apart. A normal ship would be torn apart." Yayuk agreed. "But I know that debris field. I have been salvaging parts from it for 8 years. I know every rock and every wreck and every piece of floating metal well enough to navigate it in my sleep." Vraska leaned forward, understanding beginning to dawn in her ancient eyes. "You wish to use the debris as cover. Better than that." Yayuk's hands moved across the controls, and the display shifted to show the positions of cargo pods and fuel cells scattered throughout the debris field. "I want to use the debris as a weapon." The plan was desperate and dangerous, and required more luck than any reasonable person would trust. But it was also the only chance they had. They launched within 5 minutes. Vraska in her repaired warship, and Yayuk in his shuttle with Minji riding beside him. The remnant vessels immediately began to move, closing the distance and charging their weapons, confident that their prey had chosen suicide over surrender. But Yayuk did not fly toward open space. Instead, he dove straight into the debris field with Vraska following close behind. And the remnant ships hesitated. "They are not pursuing," Minji observed, watching the tactical display. "They think we are trapped." Yayuk replied. "They think the debris will do their job for them." He flew like a man possessed, weaving between tumbling asteroids and shattered hulls with a precision that seemed impossible. His hands moved across the controls with the certainty of someone who had spent years learning every contour of this metal graveyard. And behind him, Vraska matched his course with the fluid grace of a predator following its guide. Now, Yoke said when they reached the center of the debris field. He transmitted a command code. And suddenly, the dead machines around them came alive. Mining drones he had repaired over the years began to move, pushing cargo pods and fuel cells out of the debris field toward the waiting warship's navigation buoys. He had modified flared with blinding light, disrupting sensors and targeting systems, and in the confusion, Yayuk and Vraska's ship still had weapons, and she used them with the fury of a dragon scorned, sending plasma bolts screaming into the lid warship's exposed flank. Yayuk's shuttle had no weapons at all, but he did not need them. He flew directly at the second warship's engine array and released the cargo he had been carrying, a collection of unstable fuel cells that detonated on impact and sent the vessel spinning out of control. Minji, Yayuk called over the communication channel. Your turn. Minji had already strapped into the escape pod mounted beneath the shuttle's belly. She launched herself at the third warship, the flagship, using codes she still remembered from her time with the Remnant to override its docking systems. I am going to disable it from inside, she said. Cover me. Yayuk broke formation to intercept the missiles that the flagship launched at Minji's pod, taking hits that shook his shuttle and cracked the view screen in front of his face. Blood ran from a cut on his forehead. But he did not stop flying, did not stop fighting, did not stop putting himself between Minji and death the way she had once done for him. Vraska watched this human throw himself into certain destruction without hesitation, and something shifted in her understanding of his species. Why? She roared over the communication channel as she tore another chunk from the lead warship's hull. Why do you fight like this for someone who hurt you? Yayuk's answer came between gasping breaths and the scream of failing systems. Because she is my people, and so is everyone on that station. And I do not leave my people behind. The flagship's engines died as Minji completed her sabotage. But the explosion caught her escape pod in its edge. She tumbled through space, unconscious and helpless, while the surviving warship turned its weapons toward her. Yayuk's shuttle was too damaged to reach her in time, but Vraska was not. Drakari warrior burned her remaining fuel in a desperate sprint across the void, catching the escape pod in her ship's landing claws. With a precision that would be sung about for generations, she saved the human who had been hunting her, because a human had just taught her what honor really looked like. Yayuk stopped before he reached the bay door and turned back to face Vraska with sudden clarity in his eyes. Wait, he said. I am thinking about this wrong. Vraska tilted her head, her amber gaze sharp and questioning. Explain. If I walk out there and surrender myself, I learn nothing. She controls the conversation, she controls the information, and she controls what happens next. But if we capture her instead, you wish to ambush a sovereignty intelligence captain inside her own search perimeter? The Drakari warrior's voice carried something that might have been disbelief or might have been admiration. That is either brilliant or insane. Probably both. Yayuk admitted, but I know Minji, and I know how she operates. She will come alone to talk because she always believed that the most important conversations should not have witnesses. If she is using my emotions to draw me out, then we can use that same trap against her. Vraska was silent for a long moment, and Yayuk could see her weighing the risks in her mind the way a warrior weighs the sharpness of her blade. Before battle, very well. She finally said, What do you need me to do? They worked quickly, using the base systems to create a false trail that would lead security teams to the opposite side of the station. Jihuk rerouted power signatures and triggered automated alerts in empty cargo holds, building a ghost made of electricity and misdirection. Meanwhile, Vraska found a hiding spot among the shadows near the bay entrance, her dark scales blending with the dim light until she became almost invisible when the door finally opened. Minji walked through alone, just as Yayuk had predicted. She had always been confident, perhaps too confident. And that confidence had not changed in the 8 years since he had last seen her face. But other things had changed up close. You could see new scars on her hands and a hardness in her eyes that had not been there before. She looked like someone who had walked through fire and come out. The other side is something sharper and more dangerous, Yayuk, she said, and her voice cracked slightly on his name. You look older. You look alive, he replied, which is strange, considering I watched you die. You watched me disappear, Minji corrected. There is a difference. Then explain it to me. Before Minji could answer, Vraska moved to Drakari warrior was impossibly fast for her size, crossing the distance between the shadows and the doorway in less than a heartbeat. Her clawed hand wrapped around Minji's throat, not squeezing hard enough to harm, but more than enough to make her point clear. You will explain it to both of us. Vraska growled, slowly and carefully, and with all the truth you have been hiding. Minji's soldiers would be searching the station for another hour, at least thanks to Yayuk's false trails. So they had time. They moved to a secure corner of the bay where Yayuk disabled the security cameras. And then Vraska released her grip on Minji's throat, but kept her claws extended as a reminder of what would happen if the human woman tried to run. Talk. Vraska commented. Minji rubbed her neck and looked at Yayuk with eyes that held more pain than he had expected to see. I did not die that night, she began, but sometimes I wish I had. The story she told was darker than anything Yayuk had imagined. The ambush that had destroyed their unit had not been random violence or enemy action. It had been orchestrated by a faction within the sovereignty itself, a shadow organization called the Remnant that believed humanity's only path to galactic dominance was through war with every alien species. The Remnant had needed soldiers for their cause, and they had chosen Minji because of her skills and her intelligence training. They had faked her death and taken her to a hidden facility where they had spent years breaking down her mind and rebuilding it to serve their purposes. They called it reconditioning, Minji said, her voice flat and empty. They took everything I believed and twisted it until I could not tell the difference between their thoughts and my own. I became their weapon, and I did terrible things in their name. Why are you telling us this now? You asked, because I finally broke free. Minji's hands were trembling, and she pressed them flat against her thighs to hide the shaking. It took years, but I started to remember who I was before they took me. I started to fight back against the voice in my head that told me aliens were enemies and humans were the only species that mattered. And when I finally escaped, I learned about the data that Vraska carries. Vraska stepped forward, her wings spreading slightly in a display of threat and authority. What do you know about my cargo? I know that it contains evidence of everything the Remnant has done for the past 30 years. Minji said, I know that they murdered Drakari diplomats and blamed it on the sovereignty to start a war. I know that they have been sabotaging peace negotiations between our species since before either of us was born. And I know that they will destroy this station and everyone on it before they let that data reach its destination. The bay fell silent as the weight of her words settled over them like a shroud. Yayuk looked at Minji and saw the woman he had loved buried somewhere, beneath the scars and the pain and the years of conditioning that had nearly destroyed her. You are not here to stop Vraska, he said slowly. I am here to help her. Minji confirmed. The Remnant is coming. Yayuk. They sent 3 warships the moment they realized I had gone rogue, and they will be here within the hour. I was trying to reach Vraska before they did, to warn her and to offer my assistance. Vraska studied the human woman with ancient calculating eyes. Why should I trust you? Because I have already betrayed everything I once served to be standing here, Minji said. Because the Remnant will kill me as quickly as they will kill you. And because the man I loved is standing beside you. And I would burn down the entire galaxy before I let them hurt him again. She looked at Yayuk, and for a moment, the hardness in her eyes softened into something vulnerable and real. I am sorry, she whispered, for everything, before Yayuk could respond. The station shook with a force that sent all three of them stumbling. Alarms began to scream, and the emergency lights flooded the bay with crimson warning. They are here, Minji said grimly. The remnant has arrived. The ship came through the docking gate, trailing fire and smoke like a wounded animal dragging itself home. Yun Yayuk looked up from his workbench and watched the vessel limp toward the emergency bay. Its hull scorched black in a dozen places, and its engine screaming with the sound of metal grinding against metal. He had seen plenty of damaged ships in his 8 years on orbital station Kepler 7. But this one was different. This one belonged to a Drakari. Drakari were dragon warriors, 7 feet tall with scales that shimmered like oil on water and wings that could fold against their backs or spread wide enough to block out the sun. They were proud and ancient and powerful. And they looked at humans the same way humans might look at insects crawling across their kitchen floor. Most mechanics on the station refused to work on Drakari vessels. The dragon warriors had a reputation for violence and for leaving without paying their debts, but Yayuk needed the credits. And something about the desperation and how that ship flew spoke to him in a language he understood too well. He wiped the grease from his hands and walked toward the emergency bay. The Drakari pilot was already climbing out of her vessel when he arrived, and she was magnificent in a terrifying way. Her scales were deep purple, with streaks of gold running along her jaw and down her powerful arms. Her eyes burned amber like dying stars. And when she turned to look at Yayuk, her lips pulled back to reveal teeth that could bite through steel. I need repairs, she said, and her voice rumbled like thunder trapped inside a cave. Immediately. I can see that, Yayuk replied, keeping his voice calm and steady, even though his heart was pounding against his ribs. What happened to your ship? The Drakari studied him for a long moment, and Yayuk forced himself to meet her gaze without flinching. He knew that looking away would mark him as prey in her eyes. And prey did not get hired for jobs. I was attacked, she finally said, by enemies who want me dead. That explains the weapons damage, Yayuk said, walking past her to examine the hull. Military-grade plasma burns, concentrated fire patterns. At least 3 ships working together to bring you down. He ran his fingers along one of the blast marks and frowned. These weapon signatures are human. The Drakari warrior tensed, her claws extending slightly from her fingertips. You recognize them? I know weapons, Yayuk said simply. I am called Vraska Thornscale. The Drakari said after another long pause. I am a warrior of the Crimson Fleet, and I carry cargo that must reach Drakari space within 3 standard days. Or what? Or a war begins that will burn across the galaxy and leave billions dead. Yayuk turned to look at her. Searching her face for any sign of exaggeration or deception, he found none. That is a lot of weight to put on one repair job. Can you do it or not, human? Something flickered in her voice beneath the arrogance, and the demanded was fear. Yayuk realized she was afraid, and she was trying very hard not to show. I'd understood that feeling better than she could possibly know. I can do it, he said, but I need to know what I am dealing with. You are dealing with politics and conspiracy and powers that will kill us both if they discover you helped me. I meant with the ship. Vraska blinked, and something that might have been surprise crossed her scaled features. Oh, she gestured toward the smoking engine compartment. The hyperdrive is damaged. The shields are at 12%, and something is leaking from the fuel cells. That is the life support fluid, Yayuk said, already pulling tools from his belt. Another hour, and you would have been breathing vacuum. He worked through the night while Vraska watched him with those burning amber eyes. She did not help because Drakari warriors did not perform manual labor. But she did not leave either. Jehuk found that strangely comforting. Most clients disappeared while he worked and only returned to complain about the bill, but Vraska stayed, perched on a cargo crate like some ancient statue of a guardian creature. Her tail wrapped around her feet and her wings folded tight against her back. "You work like you are fighting a battle," she said sometime around midnight. "Every repair is a battle." Yayuk replied without looking up from the engine core. "The machine wants to stay broken, and you have to convince it that being whole is worth the effort." That is a strange way to think about metal and wire. Machines are not so different from people. You believe machines have souls? I believe everything that moves and works and serves a purpose deserves respect. Vraska was silent for a long time after that. When she finally spoke again, her voice was softer than before. "My people would call you foolish for thinking such things. Your people tried to kill each other for 3,000 years before you learned to build starships." Yayuk said, "Maybe foolishness has its place in the universe." He expected anger, but instead Vraska made a sound that might have been laughter. "You are bold for such a small creature." "I am 5'10". Yayuk said, "That is average for my species." Exactly. By the time dawn came, Yayuk had repaired the worst of the damage. The hyperdrive would hold for the journey to Drakari space. The shields were back to 60%, and the life support was stable. It was not his best work, but it would keep Vraska alive long enough to complete her mission. He was about to tell her the ship was ready when the station intercom crackled to life. "Attention all personnel." The security officer announced, "A vessel has docked at Gate 7 requesting permission to search for a fugitive. All station residents are advised to cooperate fully with the search team." Vraska rose from her perch, her body tensing for battle. But Yayuk did not move at all. He had stopped breathing. He had stopped thinking. He had stopped doing anything except staring at the security monitor mounted on the wall of his workshop, where a live feed showed the new arrivals walking through the docking gate. They wore the uniforms of the Galactic Sovereignty, the human government that controlled most of civilized space there. Leader was a woman with sharp features and dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, and she moved with the confidence of someone who had never lost a fight in her life. Knew that walk. He knew that face. He knew the small scar above her left eyebrow and the way she tilted her head when she was thinking, and the exact shade of brown in her eyes. He knew all of these things because he had spent 3 years loving her and 8 years mourning her death. "Minji," he whispered, and the name came out broken and hollow. Vraska looked at him with sudden sharp attention. "You know this human?" Yayuk could not answer. He could not do anything except stand there frozen while his entire world collapsed around him because Kang Minji was dead. He had watched her die 8 years ago in a flash of fire and blood and screaming. He had carried that guilt with him every day since, the weight of it pressing down on his shoulders until he forgot what it felt like to stand straight. But now she was here. Now she was alive, and she was hunting the Drakari warrior he had just agreed to help. 8 years ago, Yayuk had been a different man. He had worn the uniform of the Sovereignty Naval Engineering Corps with pride, and he had served aboard the destroyer Relentless alongside the woman he loved. Kang Minji had been an intelligence officer, sharp and brilliant and fearless in ways that made Yayuk feel both terrified and inspired. They had been partners in every sense of the word, sharing missions and secrets and a small cabin on Deck 7 where they would talk about the future they planned to build together. Then came the night everything ended. Their unit had been sent to investigate a distress signal from an outpost near the border of Drakari space. It was supposed to be a simple rescue mission, but nothing about it had been simple. They had walked into an ambush. Jehuk still remembered the chaos of that night in Fragments that cut like broken glass, he remembered. The flash of weapons, fire, and the screaming of his teammates, and the moment when Minji had pushed him behind a bulkhead just as a plasma blast ripped through the corridor where he had been standing. Remembered her face lit by fire, her eyes wide with something that might have been love or might have been goodbye. And then the explosion had taken her. Jae-yuk had searched the wreckage for hours, digging through twisted metal and shattered debris until his hands bled, and his voice gave out from calling her name, but there had been nothing left to find. The official report said that Kang Minji died in the line of duty, killed by unknown hostile forces during a classified operation. Jae-yuk had attended her memorial service in a daze, standing silent among her family and friends, while they spoke about her courage and her sacrifice, and then he had disappeared. He had walked away from the sovereignty military and buried himself in the furthest corner of civilized space, becoming a nameless mechanic at a station where nobody asked questions and nobody cared about the ghost that haunted his eyes for 8 years. He had lived with the weight of her death pressing down on his chest like a stone for 8 years. He had believed that he had failed to save her, and now she was alive, walking through his station with a team of soldiers at her back, hunting the Drakari warrior who stood beside him. Human, Raska said, and her voice was sharp enough to cut through the fog in his mind. I need you to focus. Jae-yuk blinked and forced himself to look away from the security monitor. She is dead, he said, and the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. I watched her die. Clearly you were mistaken. I was not mistaken, Jae-yuk snapped, and the sudden heat in his voice surprised them both. I held her hand while she pushed me to safety, and I felt the explosion that took her away from me. She is walking through your station right now. Raska gestured at the monitor with one clawed hand. Whatever you believe you saw, reality disagrees. The station intercom crackled again, and this time the voice that spoke made Jae-yuk's blood freeze in his veins. Attention station personnel, Minji said, her tone crisp and professional and achingly familiar. I am Captain Kang Minji of Sovereignty Intelligence. We are searching for a Drakari fugitive who may be hiding aboard this station. Any information leading to her capture will be rewarded. Any assistance given to her will be prosecuted as treason. Raska hissed softly through her teeth. We need to move. I cannot. Jae-yuk said, I need to understand what is happening. What is happening is that your former lover is hunting me, and she will find us both if we stand here talking about your feelings. The words hit Jae-yuk like a slap across the face, sharp and painful, and exactly what he needed to hear. He forced himself to think past the shock and the confusion and the 1,000 questions burning in his mind. There is a maintenance tunnel behind the third wall panel, he said finally. It connects to the lower levels where I keep a personal shuttle. Then let us go. They moved quickly through the workshop, Raska following Jae-yuk's lead as he pried open the hidden panel and revealed the dark passage beyond. The tunnel was narrow and cramped, barely wide enough for Vraska to squeeze her wings through. But she did not complain. Drakari warriors did not complain about discomfort, especially not to humans. They traveled in silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, crawling through the guts of the station, while security teams searched the levels above them. Jae-yuk knew these passages better than anyone alive. Had spent 8 years exploring every forgotten corner of Kepler-7, learning its secrets the way a prisoner learns the walls of their self. Finally, they emerged into a hidden bay where a small shuttle sat waiting in the dim light. It was a beautiful vessel, sleek and fast, with military-grade engines and armor plating that should have been far beyond the reach of a simple mechanic. Raska stopped and stared at the ship with narrow eyes. That is not a civilian craft. No, Jae-yuk agreed. It is not. Who are you really, human? Before Yayu could answer, the bass speakers crackled to life, and Minji's voice filled the air around them like a ghost made of sound and memory. "Lieutenant Commander Yoon," she said, and the use of his old rank made Yayuk flinch. "I know you were helping her. I know you saw me on the security feed. We need to talk about what really happened that night. We need to talk about who really died." Vraska turned to look at Yayuk with something new in her. Amber eyes. It might have been suspicion or curiosity or perhaps a grudging respect for the layers of secrets this small human had been hiding. "Lieutenant Commander," she repeated. "Slowly, you were military. I was many things," Yayuk said, his voice hollow. "A long time ago. And this woman who hunts me was your mate?" "She was." "Then you must choose," Vraska said. "Will you help me escape, or will you surrender us both to the ghost of your past?" Yayuk looked at the shuttle he had been restoring for 8 years. The ship he had never quite finished, because finishing meant leaving, and leaving meant facing the life he had abandoned. He looked at Vraska, the dragon warrior who needed his help to prevent a galactic war, and he listened to Minji's voice echoing through the bay, asking him to talk about the night that had broken him. "I will help you," he said to Vraska, "but first I need to hear what she has to say." "That is foolish." "Yes." Yayuk agreed. "It probably is." He walked toward the bay door where Minji was waiting, leaving his back exposed to the Drakari warrior and the shuttle that could have carried him away from everything behind him. Vraska watched with ancient eyes that had seen empires rise and fall, wondering if this strange human was the bravest creature she had ever met, or simply the most broken,